And we are back for part two with Richard Jasper. In our last session, we were finishing up with all of the hot years, which seem to have extended throughout history. But we had covered the hot years and also what led Richard Jasper to becoming a lawyer. So please join us for the second half. All right, so you decided that you wanted to go into law, and then you decided to go to New York law. Why did you choose that school?
Well, it was local, and I really didn't have the means to travel and go anywhere else to
Hmm.
outside of the state, and it actually wound up working very well because it got me an opportunity. There were a lot of interesting trials going on, and so I was able to look at trials. Because I kind of had in my mind that I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I didn't really conceive of myself, certainly, as being a corporate lawyer.
Hmm.
That was too far a jump for me. But I wanted to deal with people and help people's lives get better. Not that there's anything wrong with corporate law, but it just wasn't I didn't see that as my path or my journey.
Right. And so, how long were you a lawyer, a practicing lawyer, before you became the deputy clerk for Chief Judge uh, Constance? It was Constance Baker Motley, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was pretty much about a year out of law school. I had met her in law school at a what we call a moot court competition,
Mm.
which is basically the equivalent of the debating team in law school. So when I was in college, I had always wanted to be on the debate team. There was somebody on my hall in my dorm who was on the debate team, but something just held me back.
Hmm.
I can't explain why, but I always wanted to do it because you couldn't really shut me up after my sophomore year in college after I had become, you know, when I got into my history major classes. So I had decided to make sure that I did not fall into that um, self-doubting trap in law school, and so it was like a primary um, goal of myself to be involved in moot court, to be involved in the debating, and and be involved in the public speaking, at in law school. And so um, I met the judge at a competition. It was the finals.
Hmm.
I had made it to the finals, and she was one of the judges,
Hmm.
and I had been, aware of her uh, historic role in NAACP Legal Defense Fund and working with Thurgood Marshall and the cases that she had been involved in, desegregation, major desegregation cases in the South, along with her colleagues at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And so after the contest was over, the school took us all out to dinner, and including the judges. And so I asked to be a student intern, and then that evolved into being, her deputy clerk, and it was just an amazing experience. I still look back on it in amazement,
She
really.
was a powerhouse.
She was a powerhouse. Anybody not familiar with her, just Google and study Constance Baker Motley.
Hmm.
Uh, she was the first black female judge appointed by President Johnson.
Hmm.
She was, I believe, the first female borough president after her legendary career in as a civil rights attorney, and just a tremendous role model for black folks, for women, for anybody who wanted to be an agent of change, as all of those great lawyers from the NAACP Defense Fund were.
So she was a judge from 1966 to 2005. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And she was the first black female chief judge of the Southern District of New York, which is a legendary court in the U.S. court system.
Hmm.
Um, and I just learned how to analyze a case, how important it is to tr- involve yourself in training, to educate yourself, that you never stop learning. Um, you know, she was driven by curiosity. I think that's one thing that you have to have, not only as a lawyer, but just to be a successful human being, successful citizen. You have to be curious. You have to question. You have to, you utilize your own independent thought process to reach the goals that you want. To be involved in skillful living takes critical thinking, and it takes sound judgment.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And so I just want to branch off into this since we're talking about this judges, as far as appointing judges. She was appointed for the rest of her life, much like the Supreme Court
Yeah, federal
judges.
judges are appointed for life. Yeah.
And what are your thoughts about term limits for these folks?
You know, it
Should or
yeah,
shouldn't we?
it cuts both ways, because the theory is that if you have a lifetime appointment, you will not be affected uh, by by politics. I think what we've seen in recent years is it depends on who's doing the appointing,
Yeah.
right? And it also depends on the two political parties, to compromise on qualified fit judges. So if, presidents are appointing people who are extremely biased, then you have a biased judge who's going to be sitting for life, and as opposed to having a term, a limited term. So I guess it probably has always been political to some extent from the beginning of the republic. Appointing federal judges and the members of the federal judiciary is very important because of the type of issues that they deal with, interpreting the Constitution. And it always comes down to in whose light, in whose eyes. It's not like judges, you know, have an eraser and just erase um, all of their life experience. You come to the bench, to the judiciary, with certain life experiences, and I think the more diverse. That's almost become a dirty word now in these times, but the more diverse um, judges you have, membership that looks like America, it will lead to hopefully sounder choices. So it's a it's a very difficult question as to whether or not term limits should be imposed, especially with respect to the Supreme Court. Now, if you have um, these different wings of the court that can exist for 20, 25, years, that's almost a generation, um, can get together and can really shape and reshape how the country lives,
Hmm.
as we could see with some controversial decisions that have been upset, that where precedence has been upset.
Hmm.
So you can't get the politics out of it. It's you want to try and reduce it so that it's not extreme. You don't want extremists sitting on the courts, but everything is contextual. It depends upon what's going on in the country, and I don't think the law or judges are ever really separate from that, because the cases that come to them in terms of what's going on in real life today.
Right. Right.
So,
Well then. So you got to see a lot when you were with Constance. I shouldn't call her that. That's
Judge Motley.
disrespectfully. Judge Motley. as if we were friends.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
uh, so you moved along, and after your clerking with her, you started practicing as a defense lawyer, and then you were discovered to be. I mean, that's the way it sounded to me when you talked to me about it. You were discovered or appointed by someone. You were tapped by someone that wanted you to focus on being on the panel
Yeah, there were
for. I'll
def,
let you roll with
yeah,
it.
for deaf eligible cases. So
Right.
that references to Judge Sterling Johnson, who was a black district court judge, a trial judge in Brooklyn. We refer to it the Eastern District of New York, and he saw me in action and recommended me to participate in death penalty cases. And that again just shows you the importance of diversity. Judge Johnson was had an extraordinary career and life. He passed away in 2022, but
Mm.
he was he was in the Marines. He was a police officer. He was a prosecutor. He had a very um, fascinating history, and he became a mentor as well. Um, Always encouraging me and encouraging all lawyers, and particularly lawyers of color, to reach for the stars and go as far as they could, and don't limit yourself. And so I started to get into death penalty work as a result of his encouragement.
Hmm. And how would you have known whether a client was going to be eligible?
Well,
And were there telltale signs prior to the, obviously before they went to trial?
the prosecutors, federal prosecutors, have a lot to say about that, right? The charges that they bring. And so we're talking about the federal judicial system. And so a person can be accused of certain federal crimes. Many federal crimes have as the maximum punishment not life, but actually the death penalty. And these were greatly expanded in 1994, actually, under President Clinton. And so at that time, there was a lot of talk and a lot of movement about war on crime. Um, and so you had an increase in um, the penalties for a number of crimes in the federal system. So a person gets charged with a crime that where the maximum penalty could be the death penalty, and that's when uh, lawyers who are experienced in a death penalty get assigned to assist and make sure that due process follows, and that you have competent people who are, basically know what they're doing in a complex case like that.
Hmm. And so you were predominantly in New York State, but you sat and chaired in other states as well.
Yeah, I've represented people facing the death penalty in other states, in Detroit, Michigan, in Newark, and those were really cases that were kind of close to my heart, because growing up in the late '60s, I remember the devastation of the riots in Detroit and in Newark, and how those two cities have tried to recover even all of this time from those riots. And so you see certain socioeconomic patterns in those cities where they're struggling. The school systems are struggling. The social services are struggling. There's a problem with the policing, and you recognize that these are cities that are still recovering from some of the events of the '60s, and in some ways are recovering, And in some ways, there's a lot to be done today.
Right. Okay. And so how many of these cases have you had?
I want to say too many,
That's
but
not funny, actually.
I've had, you know, three cases, death penalty cases that actually went to a verdict. Fortunately, nobody was executed. But when we say death eligible cases that where people could have been facing the death penalty, actually probably more than 40. Um, but each case is different. Um, one thing that you do see is enormous trauma uh, that people face in society and in certain neighborhoods. And so it's a real struggle to investigate and put together a story that actually depicts the humanity of people and doesn't demonize them, because it's when you are on the other side of a prosecution, and it's almost like the only person that you have fighting for you is going to be your legal team. And so you have to be totally devoted to that and devoted to understanding what context people came out of, what their childhood was like, what growing up was like, what their family was like. You're looking at so many different things in a complex case like that.
Hmm.
And so having experience in dealing with different people, and you're constantly learning and studying about trauma, especially especially about trauma, which is just basically an injury, emotional, psychological injury, but an injury that doesn't leave any bruises. So you,
Not physically, anyway.
not physically. So you work with teams of experts to try and help you understand um, what trauma a client has gone through, and to communicate that and tell the person's story, an authentic, real, honest story.
Hmm. Yeah. And so that's where you come in. You come in with the narrative, creating a narrative and a story arc for them
Yeah.
to humanize them. And let's be straight, you're not getting them off the hook. They're still going to be in jail. You're just getting them off of making sure that they're not on death row.
Well,
Is that it?
in many cases, yeah, that is the goal. That's what it may come down to. Just, you don't want them to be executed. You don't want them to be prosecuted in a death penalty case. And then after that, you deal with the case as a non-capital case. But your first and primary goal is to make sure that this person doesn't wind up on death row.
And what what made you feel like, yeah, I want to do that? Was it your feeling that life is precious? And so while these people may have committed heinous crimes, they don't deserve to die?
Well, life is precious, but also the whole notion of the government seeking the death penalty is so totally arbitrary and capricious, meaning that prosecutors have the right to seek the death penalty against this person, but not that person. And you also you have disparity in the way people are chosen, who is chosen, what their backgrounds are, what their economic status is. And you also run into the fact of juries make mistakes. We find that people are exonerated, people who never should have been facing the death penalty in and of itself. And if someone is executed and you find out 5 years or 10 years or 15 years later that they were actually innocent, it's really too late. So it is much more humane and much more just not to extinguish a life when there is a possibility for error. And there is also a possibility of discrimination and disparity and injustice in who gets chosen. And so those things spoke out to me very loudly, um, in such a way that I wanted to try and help anyone who was found themselves in that situation. You see people change as well. You know, people do change. There is an arc to everyone's life, and people change. And the death penalty doesn't account for that as well, especially when you're talking about younger people. Uh, we now know that people are developing really, judgment that they make is developing up into their mid-20s. We now know neurologically. So there are just a bunch of factors that make seeking the death penalty extremely unfair and inhumane in my view and the view of many others.
Hmm. Did you ever receive a thank you from folks what was your success rate first?
I mean,
What was your success rate? And then did anybody thank you of those success rates?
Success in terms of, no one has been executed.
Right, that's a
that
success.
that's the bar. But clients who are serving long sentences eventually, have have thanked me. Ones who have understood how they came to be in a position that they were in, and we help gather the family story, and we can help them understand what happened to them as a child. We have a saying that childhood matters, and I always remember this movie, an old movie in the early 80s called Trading Places,
Yes.
where you could have somebody well-to-do, rich, placed in the situation where they are stripped of all of their privileges and all of their advantages, and see what happens to them. See how it is to walk walk in the shoes of someone who doesn't have all the advantages, um, of race and class and economics, and can often wind up to be a different story.
Yeah, definitely. All right. And so you've done this for quite some time. I mean, how total years from the time that you started working, just the death penalty eligibility?
Probably since 1992.
And now you're semi-retired.
Well,
Is that safe to say?
yeah, kind of. I mean,
Okay.
I don't take on uh, cases like I used to. Have kind of shifted to more into advising and helping other teams who are representing people,
Mm.
because it does get stressful. Going to trial is an enormous undertaking. You can be working very long hours when you're actually on trial, 10, 12 hours or more a day to try to get things right. And so, it's a younger person's, game after a while.
All right.
Let's
Oh.
put it that way.
Yeah. Well, and you started teaching before you decided to back off defending cases. So you're at the Santa Clara Death Penalty College,
Yeah.
right? You've been there longer than you've been in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah, so teaching at the colleges has been a great experience, because when you teach, you learn. It's not just a one-way street.
Hmm.
And so I realize that I've been able to help with, fantastic faculty and some of the best death penalty lawyers in the country, trying to make sure that younger lawyers get it right, and
Right.
do
And
a
are
lot.
they much younger? Or what would you say is the age group of the
Yeah, well,
students that you're working with?
it can vary. Many of them are accomplished attorneys themselves in their 30s, 40s, um, but may not have had as much experience with a capital case. I mean, it is the ultimate. We like to say death is different. So death, a capital case is unlike any other case because the ultimate penalty is irreversible.
Mm.
And so you can't make, you know, silly or foolish or inexperienced mistakes. And the way to avoid that is to go to trainings and to, you know, educate yourself as to how to, like anything else, how to be the best that you can be in in your given field.
Right.
And so there's a great deal of reward in knowing that you're helping uh, another lawyer get better. And then also, younger lawyers, you know, bring insight to to the teachers. I mean, you learn from everybody that you know, you're supposedly teaching.
Mm.
And that's one of the great things I think about teaching. And you know, I know what you know teachers did for me and in my own personal arc. And so you hope that you can have an impact, you know, on people that way as well. I hope I can give, you know, be giving in terms of experience and
Right.
insight the way people shared with me.
Right. And so you'll probably still teach then? You think you'll keep
I would
teaching?
hope so, as long as as long as I as long as God gives me the energy and the wherewithal. Yeah, I mean, I think teaching in general in our society is so overlooked. I mean, you go down on the, you know, elementary school, junior high school, what we call junior high school in New York, high school. You know, of course, parents are your first teachers, so
Mm.
it has to be a collaborative effort. But just to communicate the joy of learning to people, you never stop learning. So if you're dealing with lawyers who are in their 30s or 40s, or you know, even 50s, if they're working a case up for the first time, you want to give them as much experience, as much insight as you can. And you want to do, you can do that with a team of people because nobody has all of the answers. And so we're just drawing on, you know, a broad universe of knowledge, you know,
Mm.
and it comes back also to, you know, some of the things that I learned in yoga. The foundation of yoga is awareness. And so you want the participants, you know, the people that you're trying to convey knowledge to be aware of all of the things that can go wrong so that they can anticipate before it happens and potentially save a life, save someone's life who could be exonerated down the road, save someone who may not be as culpable or as guilty as someone else,
Mm.
you know, in a case. And so you're weighing all of these kinds of factors, and at the same time, you you're not judging. Uh, you know, you're not judging clients. It's as Brian Stevenson says, we are all more than the worst thing we have ever done.
Hmm.
You are more than the worst thing you have ever done. And so that is a very powerful um, idea, concept, reality. You know, he was in that wonderful movie Mercy,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, mercy is not something that is earned. It's something that a jury or a system gives to people um, because of the value judgment. You know, well, you did this or you didn't do this. But you have to look at the context of a whole person's life. Look at what they've gone through. And it's not a touchy feely, you're not excusing or justifying, you're just trying to come up with the right solution in a given case. And as I say, the death penalty is the ultimate punishment. Yeah, and nobody has perfect common sense when it comes to who lives or who dies, which is why uh, teaching at the Capital Voir Dire College in Boulder, Colorado is so important because you want to be able to um, choose jurors who are going to realize that the decision to end somebody's life is not a factual decision, it's a moral decision.
Right.
And it's a decision that each and every juror has the power to choose life over death for whatever reason that they find. We
Right.
call it mitigation. And so mitigation is not an excuse, it's not a justification, it is a reason to choose life over death. And that's what you try and imbue
Right.
to what we call capital defenders, death penalty
Right.
lawyers.
Which is a beautiful thing. I mean, you've devoted your life to protecting life. And so you think you might smell the roses for a little while and relax?
It's hard given the fact that there are people who still think that the death penalty makes sense.
Hmm.
And so,
So you don't get to relax.
not in the sense, not in the sense that there's not work to be done.
Sure.
Because again, it's a it's a choice. People change. You don't realize what people go through until you really examine their life, and it's not this. You're trying to find excuses for something. You're trying to find reasons for for life, not reasons for death. And you want to collect all of those so that
Right.
you can make people really understand that you never ever actually have to take a life in the setting of a death penalty case.
Right. So
It's
you're
not
doing
needed.
this for life.
It's not needed.
Right.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, as long as
I'm trying to get you to slow down a little bit, but you don't want to.
well, as long as I can do it at the level that I feel comfortable with. I mean, sometimes you have to step back because you have to step back and pass the baton on to the next generation. The next generation is always coming up, and we need to support
Mhm.
the next generation in whatever field that you're in. You want to try and mentor people
Right.
and nurture people because I'm of the belief that nobody gets through life by themselves. This notion of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps to me is a bit fictional.
Right.
Everybody needs help at some point.
Right.
Needs that one person to come in and intervene or protect them from the
Right.
dangerous things that are out there in the world. Everybody needs a bubble. Everybody needs a safe haven where they can just self-assess, reflect, and not have all of the craziness of life and the survival that we have to go through.
Mhm.
Especially younger people, they need as much help and support as we can give them, so they don't get caught up in a cycle. They just get ground out by the system,
Sure.
ground down by the system, and ground out by the system.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and this is why you're considered a luminary in your field.
I don't know if I'm considered a luminary
I-
because I have benefited.
I've heard.
I have benefited from people who have shared their insight. It all comes down to sharing. We learn. We never stop learning.
That's
Life.
it.
This is school.
That's
Life
right.
is school.
That's right.
Life
Earth
is
School.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Well, thank you.
I think it's certainly been educational for me. That's why I've started calling him Professor. That's my nickname for him. And he said it's okay. So I'm going to stick with it. But thank you very much
Thank
for
you so
sharing
much.
your wisdom with
Thank
us.
you for the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. And who knows? We might be doing this again.
Yeah,
If you're feeling up to it.
very well may.
It seems like we have a lot to talk about. So thank you for joining us here on Skillful Living and Artful Life. And I will see you again. Take good care. Ciao.